by a park?
Well, Gary, it started with a photograph that we looked at. We found from the Museum of the City of New York, a new one that they had put online, and we were ready to send that out to teachers as part of their weekly allotment of Bronx history. And the photograph says slave burying ground, and that was it. So we were intrigued. We didn't know where it was. We started doing research, and the first place we went to the curator there, and we were able to find out that it's from 1910, no photographer, and it's on a place called Hunts Point Road.
And that's one of the photos we're going to look at?
That's one of the photos.
Okay,
that's
not yet. We're going to get to it. Oh, go ahead.
That started it. So then began Justin and I really bringing other people in a period of research where we found that Hunts Point Road didn't exist. It had changed to Hunts Point Avenue, so now we're on the track of, and everyone we talk to say, no, we don't know about that, or else there were plenty of places like those. Why are you worrying about this one? So we continued, we persevered, and eventually we were able to use, thinking like historians, I hope, were able to make a pretty educated guess as to where we thought the Hunts Point slave burial ground was located. And we're proud that a year and a half later...
And when was this process about?
This began, Justin and I began working on it in our spare time 2 years ago.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And I want to add one bit. In I guess it's the Drake Park, mm-hmm. They had in fact restored the burial ground of those original families,
yes.
Right? I mean, do you want to, Justin, you want to add in what everybody in the neighborhood would know is, oh, well, that was, you know, the burial ground of the families, right?
That's correct. Drake Park is named after Joseph Robin Drake, a poet from the 19th century, who was a friend of the family of the Hunts, who used to own the land in the area, and they had the cemetery, which was becoming destroyed. It was being shot at by different people playing around in the area, and it was saved by actually PS48 students and different organizations in 1962.
This is the same school 51 years ago.
Correct. But even before that story, in the 1910s, it was restored by different agencies or organizations in the Bronx. So there's a kind of a pattern of trying to save the cemetery of the landowners, mm-hmm. That we've been able to uncover.
So thinking like a historian, as Mr. Panaritas said, if you know that these people lived there and they were buried there, potentially you'd say if they had owned slaves, those slaves would have been buried somewhere nearby.
That's correct.
In other words, I'm trying to think like you guys do. And so then that led you to start, and then you found the document, you found the photograph, and that led you to start thinking, well, now, wait a minute, right? They're here. So what have you ultimately discovered and essentially proven? And some of the photographs, by the way, which we are going to show, are astounding because they really prove it. Okay.
We've been able to prove exactly where this old Hunts Point Road used to lie in relation to Drake Park, and be able to use those old maps and photographs and historical accounts that people have written in newspapers. We've been able to find out that directly across the road from what is now Drake Park, within potentially the park space itself, is an actual plot of land where the slaves were buried on a mound of dirt that once was there.
Mr. Panaritas, you work under a teaching grant, and this has become an educational project. I would editorialize an educational project extraordinaire, but what role have the children had, do the children have, and what is the educational, to me obvious, educational value of their role in this whole process?
Well, it all started, Gary, with the leadership of the school. Roxanne Cardona has been extremely supportive.
The principal.
Correct, and long-time principal. And then we assembled, with Justin's help, a team of teachers that, even though they were overworked and they found the time to come out over the summer, come out on weekends, and develop curriculum and help us explore this. So from historical research, we've been able to now take it to the kids' level, the level of the classroom, which is really what Justin heads up at the school.
Okay, so Justin, what are the kids getting out of it?
They're getting a lot out of this project. From the beginning, when we looked at the project through the educational lens with our students who are between the ages of 5 and 10, 11 years old, was having them, like you said, think as historians, trying to provide opportunities, authentic opportunities for students to become part of those roles that adults have in the world. Some of those roles are historians, some of those are researchers. And from a young age, showing these students that you can do this kind of work yourselves. And so students have engaged in looking at old documents closely. They've been using archival gloves to practice the different techniques that someone in a museum would use when they analyze history. And they've had literacy tasks where they've been reading old documents, they've been writing essays.
Well, I've got to interject something, and I want to interject it as early in the show as possible. As I understand from reading the website, and we have all the information we're going to put up for you, the original colonial house was restored, but for whatever reason, and I think the reasons are obvious, this area was paved over and they put a park on top of this particular area. Is it, I don't know which one of you or both of you can address this, it's plain and obvious that these human beings, as their rights as human beings were ignored in life, their rights were also ignored and their respect was also ignored in death, and they were paved over. Is that what happened?
Well, one of the reasons that the teachers were so keen and that the principal and all the adults associated with it have been so keen to pursue it is it's really a project about social justice, to a project about looking at something horrible that was done, not just slavery, which is horrible enough, but the fact that their remains were obliterated right next to a park, and trying to, at least, at minimum, and we're proud to say this is a step we think we've taken already, begun to write them back into history. The fact that they lived, the fact that they were buried there, and the fact that this is how they were treated. And I think that's part of all our community history there.
What do the kids say about it? They're undoubtedly as horrified or more so than we are.
They're surprised, and
they're surprised.
They have a lot of candor when it comes up. And
I'm sure.
I mean, one of the first words this spring when some of us were teaching some lessons with students was, one student goes kind of just, in her limited English, she goes, "This sounds like discrimination." And it was something that none of us had said to her. It was something that just had come out of her prior experiences, and that was one of those opportunities to realize this is a chance for the students to become advocates for what's important.
To define what is actually going on. One other question, I think I'm going to have to ask Mr. Panaridis this, because you're a teacher, he's a bit more of an administrator. Is it possible to weave these into very strict curriculums now, and are teachers taking a chance with the test scores, and I'm sorry to be so political, and everything else that they're really pressured to do because they're doing this? Or is it incorporated properly so that the powers that be are not going to say to stop doing this wonderful project?
Well, speaking about PS48, it's absolutely been woven in, and part of that, again, stems from the leadership there and the teachers who clearly, when you have common core requirements for working with informational text, these all qualify, and as you'll see in some of the slides tonight, Justin and other teams of teachers there have taken the archival documents we've found, broken them down to the level of the various children, and they're actually wrestling with them, analyzing them, debating them, arguing.
And last question before we start going to the photographs. We do have a phone call. We'll take that after we do all the photos. Do the children learn? Does it stunt their growth? Does it help their education? What is your evaluation of how this project helps them as academic students in the Bronx?
It gives them the core skills that any adult would expect to have: the ability to analyze, to be able to question, to be able to look at information around them and be able to come to understandings of what this actually means to them. Mm-hmm. And so it's beyond the writing and the reading that they're developing. It's giving those skills and qualities that we expect out of adults.
God, I hate to ask this question. Has it hurt the test scores?
No, not that we know of.
Listen,
it only enhanced the test scores.
To me, this one, and then friends and folks who have been watching the show, they know that I feel this way, that this is win, 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 win.
Authentic teaching will provide good test scores.
All right, you ready for pictures?
Sure.
Let's go through the pictures and see what we got. This is just, to me, a fascinating, living and breathing educational program. So now this picture right here.
This is the one where it all started, Gary.
That was that original photo.
That's the original photo, and it was entitled Slave Burial Ground. And in the black and white photo, you can see the remains of a more or less untended African-American cemetery, rough stones and wooden
And right now, this is covered over as part of
Right
what,
now,
the
this has
street?
been covered over as part of the park and, we believe, the street. The remains that were found are in the park.
Okay.
So that's looking to Soundview and the mouth of the Bronx River.
You know, I want to add one thing. I spoke to the Bronx Borough historian before this, and he said that this is an exception in the Bronx, and that slavery in the Bronx existed, but this was one of the largest examples of it. That the people, the Hunts and the Willets and the Leggets, were the richest and largest slave owners, that we don't have as many of these around the Bronx potentially as you might in other places. Just a point of history. All right, next, what do we got? What is this?
This is the Hunts Point Mansion. This is the original Hunt family. This was their house on the planting deck down at the end of what was Hunts Point.
About what era is this photograph?
This is from early 1900s, 1910 or so.
And where did you find these documents?
These ones, Gary, are on the Museum of City in New York and the New York Public Library websites, all public access.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's do it. What is this?
This is the restored, one of the many times that the Joseph Rodman Drake Cemetery, for lack of a better word, the master cemetery.
This was the cemetery that I said that they had spent the time, they spent the money, based on the kids from PS 48 in the early 60s.
Correct.
That's what they did.
And right across the road, within 30 feet of here, they would have seen the cemetery for the African Americans.
Do you think they covered it over knowing that it was there?
That's something that we may never know. A lot of the records have been lost, but it's certainly interesting to speculate.
By the way, in my conversation with Professor Alton, who's the Bronx Borough historian, he just completed a book on blacks in colonial Bronx, and so I haven't read it.
Great
but I think
sources.
I told him you're coming back, and we'll do part 2. Go ahead. What's next? What do we got? This is? Go ahead, Justin.
This is, we look on the left-hand side, you can see the distance is the actual Drake Cemetery, and in the foreground you have Spofford House, that was the carriage house. The man who used to live here took a lot of the old tombstones and had built his chicken coop.
Next. Now this gives you a sense, so you can see Barretto Point there. The dark, I'm going to interject here, the dark dot in the middle, that's the area we're talking about.
That's right, between Hunts Point and Barretto Point at the mouth of the Bronx River. And maps turned out to be really crucial to our investigation because we were able to place the cemetery where it ultimately turned out to be because we found out so much of the land was marshland at the time. And that's what we see there. All of the blue is at high tide underwater. So the only place that the cemetery could have been
built
was on a mound across from Drake Park, which you see in the map.
You have just taught me to be an amateur